Morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar to give you a brief update on the latest changes to GDPR and also some reflections on how GDPR is now settling down into the real world. Hopefully you can all see and hear me okay. If you could put a comment in the chat box just to let me know that you can see and hear me, that would be great, and then we'll get started. Morning, Jackie. Morning, Tyria. Morning, Diana. Great. It looks like everyone can see me and hear me okay. That's brilliant. Okay, so just to give you a brief update, then I'm going to share my screen in a minute and run through some slides with you. And then once we've done that, we've run through the slides, then there'll be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So if you have any questions, please just type them either into the chat box or into the questions panel, and I can pick them up from there. I'll probably deal with all the questions at the end unless there's something really urgent that needs dealing with as we go on through. Okay, so I'm now going to start sharing this screen with you, and you should be able now to hopefully now you can see my screen. If you let me know whether that's now showing for you, you should be seeing a picture of a microphone and a should be seeing a picture of a microphone and my slides, but it's not quite showing yet. So give me just a second. I'll try and get this working. And you just love technology sometimes. Right, let's try it again. Right, let's move that there. It's there. Okay. Start the screen share. Okay, I'm in a slight technical issue here for a moment, trying to share my screens. Do me a second, and I'll see what I can do here. Okay, I might just have to talk you through the slides then without the slides, I think, and apologies for that. It was working fine in rehearsal, and now it's no, it's not. Can you all still see and hear me okay? Yeah, looks like it. Great. Okay, I will carry on then without the slides. Apologies for that. I'll make the slides available to you after the broadcast. So, where we're at is that there have been a number of changes to GDPR in the 4 months since it came in, largely as a result of the various ICOs across Europe adapting to practicalities. One of the first things that's happened, particularly in the UK, is that the ICO has now begun to fine organisations for not registering under GDPR. We were told this might happen because they've now taken the line that it's over 4 months since GDPR came in, and therefore there's not really any excuse for companies and organisations not to have registered. But what perhaps is interesting is the level of fines being imposed, in that the batches of fines so far have ranged from £400 right up to £4,350. And if we consider that the registration fee is somewhere from £40 up to £2,900, then I think it probably gives an indication of just how seriously the ICO are taking this, and that they are proving that they've got teeth and that they are intending to prosecute. And of course, it's not just the situation of getting a fine, it's the fact that they are then making that a matter of public record. And so potential suppliers or potential customers of yours can see that you have been fined for non-registration. And so I think if anyone's not registered yet, please do get on and register, because that's really, really important. The other thing that we've seen is that the ICO have greatly increased their fines for data breaches. In the old days of the old Data Protection Act, it was probably quite unusual to see a fine that was even into the tens of thousands of pounds, and many fines were a few thousand or even below 1,000. The ICO is really now stretching that out, and that there have now been a number of fines of over £100,000. Indeed, the biggest fine so far has been to TalkTalk, which was for just around £500,000, which is obviously a fairly whack of a fine here, however big your company or organisation is. And there's this ongoing dispute at the moment with Facebook over their alleged data breach, and their fine potentially could be the first fine to be over $1 billion, which would be quite amazing if it happens. Like, personally, I'm a bit skeptical that the fine will be actually that high, but we'll wait and see. That's an ongoing process which is currently in the hands of the Irish Information Commissioner's Office, because the Irish Information Commissioner Office is taking the lead on the Facebook case solely because Facebook's European headquarters is in Dublin. The other thing in the UK is that the ICO have increased their enforcement team yet again. I think that most of you who took the training from me will know that in training we talked about the fact that they'd gone up from 30 people to 150 to 250. Well, within the last 2 weeks, they've informed the government they are now aiming to recruit another 200 enforcement officers, or full-time equivalents, before the end of 2018. Now, those new enforcement officers obviously won't come on stream until the early part of 2019, but perhaps it shows just how seriously the ICO are taking this. Plus, of course, it reflects, I think, on the way that the ICO is funded, that they're now receiving much less funding from the Treasury, and that's been gradually phased out to zero. And instead, they're expected to get the revenue from the fees for the annual registration fees, but also the fines and penalties, which they now retain in their pot rather than it going into the central Treasury pot as it used to before. So I think, again, another reason for people to take GDPR seriously, if they're not already, is the fact that the ICO are now increasing. Let's face it, by the end of the year, if they achieve their recruitment target, although recruitment's difficult, but if they achieve their recruitment target, then they'll be up to 450 enforcement officers. And the other thing that they're doing is they're making use of existing government estate around the country, but means that instead of all being based in Wilmslow in Cheshire, they're now opening regional offices around the country. And that, of course, helps their ability to enforce, because they are now much more geographically spread. And part of the reason they've had to do this is that the ICO have had a 160 times increase in the number of referrals to them. So where they were getting about 30 referrals a week, they're now getting about 4,800 referrals a week. Part of that is overkill at the moment, because there are companies who are reporting data breaches who don't really need to report them. They're not serious enough that they need to be reported. But companies are erring on the side of caution and reporting them anyway. And one thing to be aware of, by the way, is that if you ring the ICO help desk to say, I think I might have had a data breach, then they will record it that you've had a data breach, because their feeling is that if you're unsure, then you should know whether you've had one or not, and therefore you've had one. And that's just the way that they're acting to enforce the data breach rules. So to come on to some of what specifically has changed, things have changed regarding CCTV. Some of you have had your training from me late enough that you'll already be aware of this first point, but for those of you who had the training early, the right to be forgotten has now been removed from CCTV. This was for two reasons. One, because a number of large shopping centres particularly threw up their arms and just said how impractical it was, that they would need teams of people just to go through and check whether somebody's face appeared in CCTV or not, and then remove it. But the bigger issue actually came from the security services, from MI5 and MI6, who said, we need security, we need CCTV, we need to know who came into a country at a certain time. And they used the example of the Russians who came in for the Novichok attack in Salisbury as part of the justification for this, and said, no, we need to be able to watch people to see where they go. And we're not happy with the idea that that person could apply to someone to be deleted. That company could delete them quite innocently, and then actually we need that footage for some criminal investigation. And so there is no longer a right to be forgotten from CCTV generally. And I'll explain what I mean by that as we go through this slide, because everything with GDPR sometimes seems to be a bit chicken and egg. But there are now as well stricter rules on who can view your CCTV images if your CCTV covers a public area. So if you're a shop or you're an office and you've got CCTV pointing out into the street, and the office or building next door to you has somebody break in, and the owner of that property comes to see you and says, can I have a look at your CCTV and see whether I can see anybody suspicious on there? The answer to that request has to be no. The only people you should share your CCTV with are either your remote CCTV company, if the images are stored remotely, or the police. But you shouldn't allow another member of the public, in this instance, the shopkeeper or the factory owner next door is regarded as a member of the public, to view your CCTV images, not because then they shouldn't see who's causing potential damage to their property, but because they have no right to see all the other people who've been quite innocently walking down the street that day. So just something to bear in mind. However, as always, nothing's ever simple. That rule doesn't apply if it's a CCTV camera outside the front of your house. It's only if it's on the front of a commercial premise. Again, that I suspect that's a bit of legislation that will get tidied up in due course, but at the moment that's the way it lies. The other area where there's been some movement in the last 3 months is on rules on when and where you can use CCTV in the workplace to observe your employees. Typically you might have a CCTV camera for your shop above the till to monitor what's going on there, to make sure an employee is not putting money in their own pocket. And you might have it in a factory by where goods go in and out to make sure that no one's pilfering your goods. Both of those are fine. However, a case that came before the courts recently was a situation where an employer had a CCTV camera installed in the corridor outside of where the staff toilets were. And they were using this camera effectively to monitor how much downtime each employee was having by being in the toilet. The employees involved challenged this and said that it was a breach of their civil liberties, that their employer shouldn't be able to tell what time they go for a wee. And the court agreed with them, because the company could not produce a satisfactory reason. And remember, there's a lot in GDPR about having to provide satisfactory reasons. You don't need a legal reason for why you're holding a particular piece of information. And the company in this case could not provide a legal explanation of why they needed that data. And so they had to A, delete those images, and B, actually pay some compensation to the employees involved for the invasion of their privacy. And so there is a case, I think, when you're installing CCTV in the workplace, is make sure that you can justify in your own mind a good legal reason why you need that camera there, and not just because you're curious. So moving on from there, we then move on to recruitment. And again, this is an area where there's been some establishment of some ground rules. It's becoming increasingly common to ask at interview stage, or before indeed, whether a candidate has received GDPR training. And that's quite important, because if they have, then obviously you don't need to train them in GDPR, or you might just need to train them in your own little subtleties of your procedures, but you don't need to do the whole bulk thing of this is GDPR, this is why it's important, sort of thing where I make my money. So it's now becoming increasingly common to ask at interview stage, or indeed before, whether the candidate has received GDPR training. But there's another part of this, which is carrying out CRB checks. Because, again, this comes back to something I was saying on the last slide, really, where with GDPR, you need to justify why you hold a particular piece of information. There's been some question over when you should carry out, if you're an organization that needs to carry out a CRB check or similar check, when you should carry that out. And my advice would be that you perform it at the latest practical stage. So ideally, I would say when you get to interview shortlist stage, or maybe even, and some practitioners are putting this forward, only doing it when you actually send out a conditional job offer. So you do the interview process, you interview somebody, and then you send out a conditional offer saying, based on it being a clean CRB check, then we'll give you the position. But the important thing with either of those, by the way, with the CRB check, is making sure that once the employee is taken on, obviously you want to keep their CRB check, but do make sure you have a procedure in place for destroying the CRB checks of all the other potential candidates, because you certainly now have no justifiable reason for holding on to those, unless you've got their explicit consent to hold on to it for a period of time. But I would suggest that period of time should be fairly short, probably 3 months or 6 months. I certainly wouldn't want to advocate longer than that. And the other thing is that, and quite rightly, employees are now becoming increasingly aware that they should have an employee privacy policy in addition to their contractor employment. And those who've had my training will know it's important that this employee privacy policy is a physically separate document to the contractor employment. The contractor employment cannot be dependent on them signing the privacy policy, but that you should have an employee privacy policy. And I would hope that everyone on this webinar has got it in place. Please let me know if you haven't, by the way, after the webinar, we can sort that out. The other thing is the whole question of the supply chain, because it's becoming increasingly common, particularly in invitations to tender, for companies to be asked to prove that they are GDPR compliant or provide what evidence they have that they're GDPR compliant. But bear in mind, it's also your responsibility to make sure whether the companies that you work with are GDPR compliant. And so normally up the chain, but there's no reason why you can't do it down the chain as well. So normally you would do it up to your suppliers, but you could do it down to your customers. Hopefully your customers are doing it up to you. Is having a formal questionnaire that just checks that your suppliers are themselves GDPR compliant. Now, the reason that this is important is that an awful lot of GDPR relies on documentation. And if you can prove that you've asked a supplier whether they're GDPR compliant, then if they fib and they say, yes, we are, when in fact they're not, then the liability falls on them because they've lied to you. However, if you've never asked, the liability falls equally on you and them. And so it's quite important that you do ask your suppliers whether they are GDPR compliant or not. Now, if it's a large organization, then somebody like Sage, for example, you can search their website and you can find that they are GDPR compliant, and that's fine. But if it's a smaller supplier, someone who doesn't have that many customers, it is worth just checking with them whether they're GDPR compliant. And the other thing is that GDPR is now becoming globally recognized. And this is quite important, I think. We do, as time goes on, seem to be moving closer and closer to some global data standards. And the good news for us in the UK and the EU is that a good number of those standards seem to be based on GDPR. So if you're GDPR compliant, you're going to be increasingly compliant in other countries too. We now have the EU-US Privacy Shield, and there's now also a Switzerland US Privacy Shield, which is essentially the same. A couple of minor nuances, but essentially the same document. And indeed, I've helped a number of US companies now through the whole process of the EU US Privacy Shield, and it's relatively straightforward. And interestingly, it's a self-certification scheme. So the company itself says, hey, yeah, we've got everything in place. The State Department pick a few at random that they actually look at, but on the whole, they just accept the self-certification. You pay the fee. The fee is not insubstantial. The fee is like $250, but you pay the fee, and you then are, as a US company, are registered under the US Privacy Shield. And interestingly, just last week, the Japanese government have brought in a new Data Protection Act, and I'm told, I can't read Japanese, but I'm told by people who translated it, that it's very significantly modeled on GDPR. And I think we're going to see that with other data protection acts around the world as countries even come to refresh their data protection. Canada, we know, is very much in line with GDPR. I think Australia and New Zealand very soon will be. And so it is becoming more of a global standard, and that's quite important. The other thing that's happened is it's become much clearer here in the UK now what is expected and not expected in privacy policy. And so the ICO, and we've done some work with the ICO, have now become much firmer on what level of information they expect to see in the privacy policy, what they expect to see in it, what they don't expect to see in it. And as a result of that, we now have a new privacy policy template available. Quick sales bit here. If you want that new template, for existing customers, it's just £47 plus VAT. And if those of you who are listening who are new customers, if you would like it, it's £97 plus VAT. It's also become much clearer on when you need a data protection officer, but it's still a bit woolly. And let me try and explain why that is because it's now said that if you need a data protection officer, if you process a substantial amount of data, but there's still no official guidance on what substantial actually means. I would say if you're talking thousands of people, then that probably is substantial. If you're talking 50 people, I would say it probably isn't, but it is down to interpretation. And it also, they've been made clearer what they mean by process. Actually just storing data on a hard drive, storing data in the cloud, is regarded as processing. So it doesn't matter if you don't actually change that data. If you just store it, that in itself is regarded as processing. So you need a data protection officer if you process a substantial amount of data, or you process data for a large volume of people. And so again, we're talking numbers of people here, or amount of information that you hold. So if you just hold 2 or 3 fields on somebody, that's fine. If you hold absolutely everything about the people on your data, then again, you could fall under needing a data protection officer, even though the actual number of people you hold data on is not that high. You also have to have a data protection officer if you're a public body, although the rules did change for town and parish councils just before the legislation actually came in. And so town and parish councils do not need to have a specific data protection officer, although I noticed that some are appointing one. But if you're any other public body, then you must have a data protection officer. And also now they're saying that you must have a data protection officer if you work with data in an innovative or agile environment. So if you're real bleeding edge technology, then you need to have, and you're handling personal data, then you need to have a data protection officer. So there's more and more situations, I think, are going to appear where you need a data protection officer. Because of that, and because there are now more companies and more organizations requiring a data protection officer than there are anything like the number of people with the necessary experience and skill set to do it, salary expectations for a DPO have shot up. So before GDPR came in, so if you were back in April and you were employing somebody as your data protection officer, you could probably expect to pay them somewhere between £38,000 and £40,000 a year. Current adverts which are out there for data protection officers are advertising the position at somewhere between £68,000 and £75,000 a year. So, hey, great news if you're a data protection officer. It's a great career to get into. And I'll come back to that in a few slides' time, because I just want to talk about some new things now that we're offering. The first is that we're conscious that a good number of you have a view on this webinar, but also much broader in our whole customer base, have questions about GDPR that crop up from time to time. And some of those, yeah, you can get answered by FAQs on the website. Some of them you might give us a call on. But we realise there's this need for support at a reasonable cost base. And so we're today introducing the Members Club. And I'll run through the benefits of the Members Club and then I'll talk about the cost. So the Members Club means that you can email your questions to us at any time and we will reply within 1 working day of receiving those questions. Obviously, assuming it's a GDPR related question, but you can email as many questions as you want. By becoming a member of the Members Club, you also get half price training for your new employees. You also get our help on data privacy impact assessments for half price. You also get half price quarterly or annual audits. And you also get half price annual refresher training, because another thing that's come out of the ICO is that they're now recommending that everybody has annual refresher training on GDPR to bring them back up to speed. And if you're a member of our Members Club, you get that for half our normal price. You also get access to new documents as they're issued. So if you're a member of the Members Club, then you get our new, for instance, our new updated privacy policy template, which I mentioned a few slides ago. You get that completely free. You get that included within your subscription to the Members Club. And there will be other new documents as we go through the year. You get access to our GDPR documentation library. And I don't know how many of you are listening to my GDPR Weekly Show podcast. I hope you all are, but if you're not, please do listen. I have a new podcast which I've started about 6 or 7 weeks ago now, where I talk for 30 minutes every week about GDPR and the world of GDPR and what's changing. It's proven to be very popular. We now have something like 660 listeners right across the world. And if you're a member of the Members Club, you're going to get access to my GDPR Weekly Show podcast 1 day early, so 1 day ahead of the rest of the world. Why is that important? Because sometimes we will have some special offers on the podcast and it will give you a heads up to take advantage of those. And the podcast, I'm also going to very soon have my first interview on the podcast, and I'll be interviewing various industry figures about GDPR and about the impact that the new data protection regulations are having on their business, and also hints and tips. So that's all within the podcast. But if you're a member of the Members Club, you're also going to get an exclusive 10 to 15 minute extra teach podcast every week, because the one thing I don't do in my general podcast, in the GDPR Weekly Show podcast, is teach. But if you're a member of the Members Club, you'll get an extra podcast 10 to 15 minutes long every week, which will be a teach. So how much is all this going to cost? Well, good news is it's going to cost less than a cup of coffee from Starbucks a day. The cost is going to be just £97 a month, excluding VAT. And for those of you on this launch webinar, you can get your first month's membership for £47, excluding VAT. And if you remember, the new privacy policy is £47 ex VAT for existing customers. So if you join the club, you effectively get the privacy policy for free, or you buy the privacy policy, you get the first month in the club for free, whichever way you look at it. But either way, it balances out. And also, the other thing that I'm introducing in the club, because I think this is something that's worth doing, I'm aware that even at £97 a month for charities or schools, that's quite a cost. And so I'm introducing the concept of buy one, give one. And what that means is that when you sign up and join the club, you can also nominate a school or a charity or any organization you want, as long as it's not a profit-making organization, it's not a company. You can nominate them. And what that means then is that for all of the time that you remain a member of the club, they get membership of the club with all the same benefits, but they get it for totally free. And it's up to you whether you want to let the club know, whether you want to let the organization you're giving to know that you're giving it to them, or whether you want to be anonymous. That's fine. That's entirely up to you. But it does mean that charities and schools can get our GDPR advice, solid GDPR advice, but they can get it for free. So it's buy one, give one. And I hope people like that initiative. And I will, after this webinar, be sending out to you the link where you can go to sign up to join the members club. It's on the slide in front of me, but obviously you can't see the slides. So I will send that out to you later today after this webinar. I want to roll back a little bit now, just finally, to talk about data protection officers again, because you don't necessarily need to have an internal data protection officer. You don't necessarily have to employ somebody. You can use an external data protection officer, which is a service that we're now offering. Why might you want an external DPO rather than an internal one? Well, if you have an internal one, you have all the extra costs of recruitment, of employment contracts, of pensions, of holiday, of sickness, of training, of making sure they keep their training up to date. All of those costs on top of the salary of, say, 68 to 75,000. If you use us as your external DPO, then it's up to me. It's my problem to make sure that myself and my colleagues are trained in all the new things coming into GDPR, all the changes. Well done, Maxine. Just in your comment. And so, yes, if someone would like to nominate Maxine's organisation at Farm IG as their not-for-profit, then please do give her name when you do the sign up to buy one, give one. Anyway, coming back to the external DPO for a minute, rather than employing somebody internally, we are now able to offer a full external DPO service and forget £68,000 a year as a salary. We offer our external DPO service, and we've now got 2 companies using this already, for just £5,000 per year. So a very substantial saving on how much it would cost you to have someone internally. Because of doing externally, we're able to be more flexible. Right, so now it's over for questions. So if you've got any questions, please just put them into the chat and I will do my best to answer them for you. So anyone got any questions? Any questions at all? Or everyone happy? If you're happy, let me know. If you've got any questions, let me know. Just put a message in the chat box. Thanks, Toya. Thanks, Jackie. Jackie, yeah, working with data in a innovative way is if you're bringing new technology or new ways of working which aren't out there in the wider domain. So if it's real bleeding edge ways that you're working with data, maybe you're working with big data, maybe you're actually putting lots and lots of data together, then that would fall under that category. It's really a case-by-case basis. It's a bit hard to generalize, but it's really, if you feel that what you're doing with your data could be regarded as cutting edge, then that's important. Francis, how relevant is it for small non-VAT reg charities to register? Very important, Francis. If you're a charity, you really should be registering. But the good news for you is that if you register as a charity with the DPO, you don't need to if you register as a charity and as DPO, you don't need to pay the registration fee, but you do still need to register. So charities are exempt from paying the fee, but they're not exempt from having to register. That makes sense. Ruth, yeah, I agree. The cost for you, I know, are probably prohibitive, and unfortunately, there's nothing I can do there. But obviously, you know, I've known you a long time, so if you have an issue, do reach out. Chris, we write business plans and personal data we hold is transient, i.e. we don't keep it once plans are completed. Do we need to be registered? Yes, you do, Chris. It doesn't matter if you have the data only for 24 hours. You still need to be registered. So that's quite important that you do that. Okay, any other questions for me? Sorry, Chris. Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, you've all got my email address, so if anything interests you afterwards, please do send an email out to me. I hope you found this useful. Please do listen to my podcast every week. Brian, if a small business registers for the first time now, any risks? No, not at all, Brian. It's better to register than not. Yeah, please do listen to my podcast. You can find it on iTunes, and yeah, I will send you a link, Ruth. I'll put a link in the email along with the link to sign up to the members club. And remember that sharing is caring. So if you know of other people who might be interested in the services that I'm able to provide, then please do put them in touch with me. And thank you all for your time of taking 40 minutes out of your day to listen to this update. And I apologize for the problem with the slides, and hopefully we can correct that for next time. As I say, it's one of those things that sold to law. It worked perfectly fine when we rehearsed this yesterday. So yeah, thank you everybody, and I'll end the broadcast there, and I will be sending out the slides later today, so you'll get the slides and a link to a recording of this podcast, of this broadcast, and also a link to where to find the podcast. So thanks everybody, and have a good day.